Okay, let's unpack this then. You've got a Formula One driver right now, and he's like right at the absolute top of his game. He's winning races. He's constantly on the podium, sitting fourth in the championship, basically having his best ever season.
Yeah, absolutely flying.
So you'd think naturally the team would be scrambling, lock him down long term. Simple.
You would think so.
But, and here's the puzzle, we're talking George Russell.
Yeah.
And for 2026, nothing confirmed. No contract.
It is, it's a really fascinating situation, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've been digging into some detailed discussion from, a top F1 blog, really trying to pick apart the strategy, the speculation around George's whole situation.
Right.
Our mission basically is to try and figure out why. Why is this top driver performing so well, still, technically available?
And the first thing that kind of jumps out from the source material we looked at is the question it asks right away. Does it have a simple answer? And the answer is no.
Exactly. Which just makes it more intriguing.
Especially when you hear Toto Wolff, the Mercedes boss, he's been raving about George, praising him constantly, but still no signature on that 2026 paper. So yeah, let's dig in. First off, let's just underline how good Russell's 2025 actually is. Not just, pretty good. He's a race winner. That's the big one.
Huge benchmark.
And beyond that, podiums in half the races so far. Half. He's just consistently bringing home the silverware.
Converting those shares.
And being fourth overall in the standings, ahead of some really big names. That says a lot about his form, his maturity now.
And that's what makes the contract thing so odd on the surface. The source material really hammers this home. It's not just a strong season. It's George Russell's best ever Formula One season. Period.
Career best.
Yeah, think about that.
Yeah.
A driver hitting new peaks, proving his value every single weekend, and yet no future commitment locked in from the team. It goes against the grain of how F1 usually works, right? It's securing your stars is priority number one.
Absolutely.
So it makes you ask, okay, what else is going on here?
And for a while earlier in the season, it really seemed like the obvious answer was, the max factor, as the source calls it.
Ah, yes, the Verstappen question.
I remember Toto Wolff's comments, especially around the Chinese Grand Prix. He was openly talking about Max Verstappen being, top 3, top 2, potentially even the top #1 driver in the world.
High praise from a rival boss.
When you hear that about that driver specifically, it definitely sends shockwaves, right? And it looked like it was directly influencing Mercedes' thinking.
Oh, absolutely. And if you zoom out, the early part of the year was just full of noise around Red Bull, wasn't it? Internal stuff, questions about Max's long-term plans.
Yeah, lots of drama.
There was real talk about whether he might even look elsewhere for 2026, given all that turbulence. And our sources definitely suggest Mercedes was, let's say, keeping an eye on that, reportedly holding out for him.
Waiting to see if the big fish became available.
Exactly. The chance to maybe snag a generational talent like Verstappen, that would change any team's plans, including their driver lineup strategy.
Yeah.
It shifted the whole dynamic for a while.
And this is where it gets really interesting now. That whole Max element, it's kind of like the source says, fallen into the background.
It has, hasn't it?
Red Bull's season, okay, it had some wobbles, but it hasn't been a disaster. Max is still winning. And his whole vibe, the things he's saying, the source mentions his head, talks about this team's done a lot and things clicking.
He sounds more committed again.
Yeah, seems like it. So the idea of Max leaving, it's not really the hot topic anymore. And that changes things massively for George Russell.
It does. That shift is so important. It means all that intense speculation about Verstappen jumping ship to Mercedes, it's pretty much cooled off.
Right.
So the landscape for Russell looks different now because Mercedes probably isn't thinking they have a realistic shot at the world champ anymore. Their talks with George can happen without that huge what if hanging over them. It simplifies things in a way.
Okay, so if the Max factor isn't the main holdup anymore, then what is? Is it just normal contract stuff, slow negotiations, or is Mercedes being a bit more strategic about it? Calculated, maybe?
Well, looking at it from the Mercedes side, the source points towards classic negotiating tactics. It's textbook, really. Meaning they don't want to force a deal too quickly. Why? Because if you rush, you might weaken your position. There's this idea that it's always good to keep them hungry, keep the driver pushing.
Interesting.
And we've seen this backfire elsewhere, haven't we? The source brings up that Red Bull example with Sergio Perez last year. They gave him the new deal after Monaco, thinking it'd settle him, boost him.
And it kind of did the opposite.
It had the opposite effect, yeah. His form just dipped afterwards. So it really makes you think, how much does the timing, the security, or lack of security of a contract actually impact a driver's performance, their headspace. It's a really tricky balance for teams.
That's a fascinating angle, the psychology of it all. So for George specifically, what does this patient approach mean? Are they just like playing hardball with their own star driver?
You could see it that way, yeah. Mercedes effectively, well, they manage his career, right?
Right.
Which means no one else can do a deal without them saying yes.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of control.
They hold the cards.
Pretty much. So there's no need to rush to get it done because George isn't really going to go anywhere else. They know that. They have the leverage. And honestly, this isn't unusual for Mercedes.
It's their MO.
Historically, yeah. The source states very, very rarely are things done any earlier than now. Think about Lewis Hamilton's deals. One wasn't announced until August 31st, after the summer break. Another time, it was February 8th, like a month before the season started.
Wow, cutting it fine.
It shows a pattern. It's deliberate, it's patient, it's strategic. They work on their own clock, not anyone else's.
It really is such a strange situation, though, isn't it? You've got Russell absolutely smashing it, form of his life, leading the team. But then you look around, and it doesn't seem like he has loads of truly appealing alternatives if he wanted to jump ship.
That's the paradox, right? It's almost like his success at Mercedes makes it harder for him to leave. A bit of a golden cage.
That's a good way to put it. Even though his performance should give him massive negotiating power, Mercedes still holds all the cards, largely because those alternatives just aren't really there or aren't suitable.
So where else could he even look?
Well, the source breaks it down. Red Bull. Highly unlikely. They probably wouldn't want the pair Max and George. Too much potential friction.
Yeah, two alphas.
The source suggests Red Bull prefers that model. A clear star driver and someone to not necessarily be number two, but a good, solid backup. Avoids the internal battles. Russell joining would likely disrupt that. Sure, Christian Horner bumped into George. They had a chat, but it definitely hasn't gone as far as, do you want a deal? Just talk. Okay, so Red Bull's probably out. What about the other big teams?
Let's see. Aston Martin. Nope. The source is blunt. Unfortunately, Aston Martin can't run a third car next year. And they've got Alonso and Stroll locked in.
Right, no room at the end.
Unless George fancies being a simulator driver or development driver, which, let's be honest, given how he's driving, not happening.
Not a chance.
Then you've got Alpine. They do have a seat open.
Well.
But, as the source implies very heavily, would you swap Mercedes for Alpine? Given the performance gap right now, the answer is pretty clearly no. Mercedes is still fighting near the front.
Yeah, that'd be a big step down performance-wise.
So realistically, his truly attractive options outside Mercedes are, well, basically non-existent for 2026.
So Mercedes can pretty much just wait him out. They can kind of call his bluff because they know there isn't a better seat available right now.
That's basically it. Russell doesn't have a better option that's available tomorrow. Mercedes knows this. And it lets them control the timing, make sure the deal is done robustly, not in a rush, on their terms.
No danger of him being poached.
Exactly. Because they manage his career anyway. And frankly, he's already where he wants to be, driving for a top team.
Yeah.
It gives Mercedes a really strong hand. They can play this patiently without much external pressure.
It is good to hear, though, that Russell himself seems pretty chill about it all. The source says no hard feelings about those earlier Max discussions. He gets the business side.
He seems very pragmatic.
And apparently he's not worried about his place next year. Which shows his confidence, right? His focus is Mercedes. He even made that joke about needing a Valkyrie Bottas-style naked calendar to raise funds if things got desperate.
Haha, yeah, that shows he's got a good sense of humor about it, keeping it light,
Yeah.
which is probably the right attitude. And that perspective is key. Look, while it's definitely intriguing at the moment for Russell being out of contract, we need context. It's only June 2025.
Still plenty of time, technically.
Exactly, which leads to the question, when does intriguing become, uh-oh, this is actually worrying?
Yeah, where's that line?
The source gives a pretty clear marker. It says if he's still out of contract by February 2026, then we've probably got a bigger story on our hands.
Okay, so we're not there yet.
Not even close, especially by Mercedes' historical standards. There's loads of time for this to get sorted without hitting the panic button. It's a waiting game, sure, but one Mercedes seems very comfortable playing.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, it seems like George Russell's contract situation, which looks odd from the outside for a guy driving so well, is really more about Mercedes playing strategic chess.
Yeah, a masterclass in negotiation, you could say.
It's calculated.
Yeah.
It's possible, partly because his own success, ironically, limits his other appealing options right now. So it's not really about Mercedes lacking faith in George.
Not at all.
It's more about timing, leverage, and just playing that long game that big F1 teams are so good at.
And isn't that just fascinating? It shows F1 is so much more than just what happens on the track. When you think about Mercedes, their history, their long-term view, and Russell's talent, this whole scenario tells you so much about the real power dynamics in Formula One.
Beyond just who's quickest.
Absolutely. It's about who holds the leverage, who holds the cards off the track, and crucially, when they decide to play them. How does that affect everything else? Team stability, driver psychology, performance.
Yeah.
What does this tell you, about that hidden layer of management strategy, those chess games going on constantly behind the scenes? It's something to really think about next time you hear a contract rumor or see an announcement. It's this constant dance of power, performance, and timing.